Alright, there's a bunch of crap to respond to in this video, but I'm just going to focus on the main point, and then I'll get over into the less important stuff. Now, Eagle Eye's main contention in this video is this.
The measure of success for a person is subjective. And they're trying to, the race realists, what they're doing is trying to impose IQ as a function of, as a predictor of future earnings, as the penultimate measure of a person's worth and success in life. So what they're saying is, because we value money more than you, because we value money, we are going to dictate to you that money is the be-all and end-all of success. And because one of the major predictors of how much money you will make is IQ, we're going to declare to you that whites are better than blacks because we can make more money and thus ultimately be more successful. Challenge those premises. Challenge the premise of what it means to be successful. Challenge the premise of money being an indicator of a person's success. Why are you imposing your subjective belief structure of what it means to be successful upon the entire race of humans, upon the entire population of the world? Why are you imposing your subjective valuation of what it means to be a good, successful human being on other people? What gives you that right? And I tell you what, they'll slink away with their tail between their legs. They have no response to that. I dare them to have a response to that. Fringe Elements, man, I used to respect you, but...
Now, I don't like the term race realist because it's presumptuous. Everyone thinks their views on race are quote-unquote realist. I've said this quite a few times. I've said in my latest video and in my central video on this matter, make the world flat, but I'll go ahead and say it again. There is income inequality within the United States between races, between these extant, observable, self-identified races. Okay, this income inequality is noticeable, and the gap hasn't narrowed since the mid-1970s. Why is this the case? Is it because of some environmental or historical reason, or is it because of genetic differences? Environmental, if you want to talk about epigenetics, I would put epigenetic effects under environmental. The answer to this question, the nature, nurture, and racial differences, has profound political consequences. One is immigration and integration. The idea that any state can just bring a representative sample of people of other races and integrate them into a democratic state, basically having these people become white people with just different physical features. If this idea is wrong, and there are in fact significant brain differences between the identifiable colloquial races, then they're not just going to interchange with whites. They won't earn as much. They'll probably be resentful, and they will generally make life miserable, as is happening today. They also tend to vote for state socialist parties. So for bringing in like a bunch of Amerindians from Mexico, it's going to lead to very anti-libertarian outcomes. My contention is that the situation you have in London and Sweden and most of Europe in regards to the multiracial populations, this situation is more or less permanent, that they're not going to integrate. Also, you have affirmative action, which isn't very bad in the United States right now, but one can simply look to South Africa for a glimpse of the future, or perhaps Zimbabwe. We'll see how South Africa goes. Zimbabwe may be something like a feature in the United States. Also, affirmative action becomes completely misguided and harmful if the disparities between the races are a result of some innate characteristics. Because if the disparity, the aggregate, for example, academic performance or job performance is a result of some innate disparity, then any affirmative action is not correcting for any injustice. But if the inequalities are a result of some injustice, or in the environment, or the effects of some historical oppression, then affirmative action becomes a much more reasonable proposal. You see how this works?
There are a bunch of socio-political things that, I do actually sympathize with. I don't necessarily agree with, but I can see where they're coming from the race realist standpoint, like, where it's impossible for any brown person to actually be called a racist. But if we want to talk about that, that's a whole other topic. But let's get past this deadlock that we have between the IQ and genetics debate, and whether race is a social construct or not. Let's get past that. It's an irrelevant point to discuss. If we want to talk about the sociopolitical aspects of racism and how things are being applied unfairly to one race and not the other, and we're not maybe we're not recognizing racism from the other perspective, or maybe there's a double standard. Let's have that discussion. But let's get past the other discussion first. I mean, do you really want to continue to beat heads against the wall or against each other on this irrelevancy? And because that ultimately the purpose of the argument about race and IQ is to get to the socio-political differences and problems and solve them, isn't it?
Eagle Eye wants to talk about these issues while skipping the descriptive account of race. He talks about, for example, double standards on what's considered racist. Like blacks, like it's okay for blacks to have a black identity, but it's racist for whites to have a white identity. And we can talk about that without reference to race and intelligence and income inequality. And the problem with this argument is that the double standard for blacks being able to have a black identity, that comes from a descriptive view of the world. That is the view that blacks are oppressed and or still facing the effects of prior oppression, i.e. the outcome inequalities being a result of that oppression. Therefore, blacks are legitimate in their group identification. Okay. Any argument about any of these issues rests on a descriptive view of race and IQ and income. Okay. Now you'll notice none of these things that I'm talking about has anything to do with notions of some objective notions of superiority or inferiority or income being analogous to some objective standard of success. I would say that that's something that you just pulled out of your ass, that's something you just made up, but I don't think it is. I think you got it either from Hannibal Barca or from EvoGen videos. And I was wondering, why the hell is Eagle Eye trying to be, trying to engage with Hannibal Barca? Well, I think it's because EvoGen videos has kind of convinced him that Hannibal Barca is an okay guy or whatever. Eagle Eye could not have gotten the idea that we simply want to lord over our objectively superior success over black people. Like, he couldn't have gotten this idea from any major Hereditarian's video. Okay, he could not have got it from any of my videos. He couldn't have got it from Laughing Man's videos, Libertarian Realist. There's absolutely zero excuse for Eagle Eye to have made this slanderous straw man. Okay, it's clear that he inferred my position from either what Hannibal Barca said or what EvoGen said. And ironically, he makes this video right after a video where he talks about the importance of intellectual honesty and not strawmanning and asking questions. Alright, that takes care of the main issue that I want to talk about here. Now let's go over some of the other things. First off, Eagle Eye has been convinced by EvoGen that race is a social construct and not a biological construct. And really this issue is quite simple. There is genetic variation. It tends to cluster in semi-discrete populations, and these populations are recognized by everyone, including population geneticist Louis Cavalli-Sforza, who recognizes a bunch of populations but says that race doesn't exist. Right? That's his opinion. But Cavalli-Sforza describes 10 distinct populations that conform very nicely with classical notions of race. He has Arctic peoples, Amerindians, East Asians, Middle Easterners, Southeast Asians, South Asians, Europeans, Africans in general, Papuans, and Bantus and Pygmies. And that's just from memory. I may have got one of them wrong or something. So you can say race exists or not. The concept of race, of course, predates modern genetics. And what this means is that whether or not race is genetically real depends on how you carry over this pre-knowledge of genetics concept over into a knowledge of genetics. Okay, and so what it really does is it depends on your personal definition of race, because you had a pre-genetics concept, and then genetics was discovered. Well, what do we now do with race, this pre-genetic concept? Well, what you can do is you can define race in such a way that it is, something useful in a genetic heuristic, or you can define race in a way so that race is not genetically real, is not biologically real. Okay, whether or not race is biologically real depends on a definition of race. So there's no objective definition of race. These are all just categories. These are all just delineations, and they are socially constructed. That is, there is genetic variation and clustering, and they are then bundled conceptually by humans. So you can say it's a social construct if you want, but that doesn't mean it's arbitrary or inconsequential. EagleEye also says IQ tests are culturally biased. And there are a few ways to show that they're not, and what I mean by that is not within Western countries. When controlled for IQ, black-white income differences virtually go away, so if IQ tests are biased, then they just so happen to be precisely as biased as the U.S. job market, or as precisely racially biased as the U.S. job market, which would be quite a coincidence. The SAT predicts for students of all races virtually the same, and the SAT correlates with IQ at around 0.81, whereas IQ tests self-correlate at 0.87. So the SAT is functionally an IQ test, and there is no racial predictive discrepancy. On quote-unquote culture fair IQ tests designed to have no cultural bias show no significant racial differences. Raven's progressive matrices, which is just shape pattern completion, shows virtually the same racial gaps as culturally loaded tests, or tests which make no attempt to limit their cultural loading. Perhaps all this is why, in the 1994 statement of 52 internationally known researchers on intelligence, one of the things they said was, quote, "Intelligence tests are not culturally biased against American blacks or other native-born English-speaking peoples in the U.S. Rather, IQ scores predict equally accurately for all such Americans, regardless of race and social class. Individuals who do not understand English who do not understand English well can be given either a nonverbal test or one in their native language." EagleEye also said that I cherry-picked studies, that I abused and misused studies, and that the egalitarians have soundly refuted the, quote, race realists, as he calls them. And of course, he provides no examples of any of these things in this video. However, I will claim that egalitarians miss the point a lot and make high-level errors in their thought processes. And here are some examples of that. One would be that arguing that race doesn't exist, right? This is stupid because race is a category and a bundling or lumping of a continuum. And none of these categories are objectively right or wrong. They are just categories. They are just ways of bundling. You can either lump or you can split, right? You got lumpers and splitters. None of it's objectively correct. But even people who say that race doesn't exist or want to say that race doesn't exist, they still deal in populations and clines and genetic clusters, okay? And these are just, by my personal definition of race, these are just these are just dealing in race without using the word race. Second major error is that egalitarians will argue that one must find specific gene cluster associations with intelligence and then their distribution among the various races or populations or whatever in order to infer genetic causation of differences in IQ. That is, you cannot holistically infer genetic causation through things like factor analysis, admixture studies, twin studies, or adoption studies. You can't do this, right? You have to find the specific genetic structures, all right? But the funny thing here is that it's not fundamentally different from what I'm doing. Right? I want to make holistic inferences. I want to make holistic inferences, say, this genome, based on the evidence that I see, this genome holistically is different from this one. Whereas they demand a series of smaller inferences, but they're still doing the same thing. That in order to find the effects of, say, a particular gene association cluster a bunch of alleles and whatever. I'm not a geneticist, but whatever it is they need to find, they would have to infer the effects of that in the same way I infer the effects of the entire genome. That is, they're going to have to, in order to determine which genes and alleles and clusters impact IQ, they're going to have to do adoption studies and twin studies and like controlled environment studies as well. Okay, they're going to be having to do all that inferential stuff, except they're going to be doing it instead of doing it and thinking based on the entire genome. They're going to be doing it they're doing a much harder thing, that is to try to, disentangle the effects of the various genetic clusters. Now, and the thing about this is that only for race is this method applied, is this demand applied, that you find the specific genetic data. You can't not just inferring holistically. If this were applied consistently, then we wouldn't be able to tell if perceived differences between various animals was a result of genetics until we found the effects of the specific clusters and stuff like that. Okay, so this standard is only applied for human population differences. And what's more interestingly is that it's not really applied. I mean, you get a few egalitarians who say that individuals are profoundly equal. But this standard is not really applied for the most part. People are more reasonable when talking about individual differences. It's when you get into matters of race that they then raise the standard and say you need to pinpoint the genetic structures. EagleEye lastly said something really stupid. He was talking about IQ tests. They wouldn't predict for Bushmen, for example, like if you gave a Bushman an IQ test, like the IQ of the Bushman, like I don't know what the point of this is. I'm talking mainly about income inequality between the self-identified races within the U.S. and the causes of that. Okay, so all this stuff that you're saying about Bushmen not being motivated and taking an IQ test, I don't care, because I don't talk about freaking Bushmen. You can make an argument that on some other planet, that on this other planet, what you have to do is you have to swim, and that in order to eat, in order to get food, you have to grab fish floating by in the water with your bare hands. And so your survival, your success in this environment is predicated on your ability to swim and your ability to grab fish with your bare hands. Now, how well would an IQ test predict for this? Well, it wouldn't predict at all. And of course, it's not designed to predict for an environment like that at all. And similarly, it's not designed to predict for the generally considered metrics of quote-unquote success, but really I'm talking about income. It's meant to predict for income in a place like the United States or a place like Western Europe.
What's funny is also how, okay, someone like Fringe Elements. Fringe Elements is I guess minarchist now. He used to be an anarcho-capitalist.
All right, well, for the record, for people to know, I'm not a statist. And what's interesting is that there's no real indication on my channel or in anything I've written or said that I am now a statist. So there's no indication of any of that, but yet EagleEye came to that conclusion. How could he come to that conclusion if I provided no indication of such a thing? Well, it's clear that EagleEye got that perception from somewhere else. Where else? Well, who knows? Perhaps True Puka. The True Puka made a video saying that I am a segregationist. I want people and groups to be segregated. Okay, and that requires a state. Therefore, I'm secretly a statist. Now, of course, he's wrong in both of those things, and he actually knows because he posted a comment recognizing that I was talking about moving to Singapore. So he knows he's being dishonest in this. And of course, if anyone knows about Singapore, it is not a racially segregated place. It's a very big free marketplace, right? That's one reason I'm interested in visiting there and perhaps moving there, perhaps. Anyway. So EagleEye is coming to conclusions about my positions based on what he's heard from other people. So what? The viewer might care. That you guys don't care about me qua me. Well, here's why you should care. You should care because he's probably going to do that with other people, right? We know he's done it with libertarian realist and the quote-unquote race realists, as he calls them, in general. Oh, and that's another funny thing about Eagle Eye is he doesn't let you name yourself. You know, I kept saying, stop calling me an anarcho-capitalist. I don't know what like capitalist means in regards to anarcho. Anarchism means to be against archy. Archy is whatever you don't like. It's a vague, meaningless term. All right, stop it. Okay, and he would not stop it. He kept calling me an anarcho-capitalist, and that's something I've noticed about Eagle Eye. Is he doesn't let other people self-name. So Eagle Eye did something quite inexplicable, saying, "I'm going to have a intellectual discussion with Hannibal Barca." You know, he had this belief that perhaps Hannibal Barca would provide some real intellectual stimulation, and what he did was something that is quite shitty. And that is saying, yeah, I understand you, Hannibal Barca. I mean, these anarcho-capitalists, they do strawman you. They are rabble. They are whatever, right? Kind of dumping on anarcho-capitalists a little bit. Which is also kind of silly because, I mean, the people he's interacted with, the anti-statists he's interacted with, me, Laughing Man, Spock, Overmind, when they did not call themselves anarcho-capitalists when he interacted with them. So this is yeah. He's interacting with Hannibal Barca saying, you know, these ANCAPs, you're right. They are kind of shitty. But you can talk to me. Talk with me. I'm reaching out to you, Hannibal Barca. Talk to me, not them. Not them. Talk to me. I'm separate from them. They are crappy, but not me. Right? I'm separated from them. I am more moderate than them. So you can have a reasonable discourse with me, right? And Martin J. Willett kind of did the same thing, and of course Martin J. Willett I think is failing on that. He was saying, yes, you have these race realists or whatever, and they are racists, right? These people are racist, but I'm not like that. I'm separate from them. I am above them, and right, Martin J. Willett's kind of trying to distance himself from the other chaff, right? And Eagle Eye, of all people, should recognize that if you hold controversial opinions, you will be lied about. Your views will be strawmanned monstrously. Okay, and you've experienced this. You spent years experiencing what the YouTube atheists say about libertarianism regularly. You should know. You have no excuse to fall for other people's characterizations of radical positions, or maybe you didn't make that kind of principled connection. Right? Maybe for you it's like, well, libertarianism gets strawmanned all the time, and you think that it's just isolated to libertarianism and not all other radical positions. I also have another suspicion, and that is that Eagle Eye, he makes a lot of videos talking about how he doesn't get many views or comments or ratings, that his channel is not getting the attention that he thinks it deserves. Let's say he gets in good with Evogen and some other of the YouTube atheist cult, okay? And he does this on the issue of race, saying, you know what, this race thing, this is my ticket in to the big time. This is my ticket in to finally have the audience that I truly deserve. That's what I think is going through Eagle Eye's mind. And of course, yeah, I'm publicly psychologizing someone. That's a real kind of dick thing to do on my part. But Eagle Eye is kind of a dick, so I really don't care. So I think that's what he's doing, and whether or not this whole thing about his views on race is a front, I don't think so. What I think happened is that he was looking for a way into atheist cult, and because of that, he was more receptive to arguments against me on race. Right? And of course, throughout in his video, he mentions me by name. He's very clear in that he wants to call me out. He wants to dump on me. He's not very ambiguous on that point. So basically, he's wanting to separate from me into atheist cult, get featured on channel pages and stuff, and get a bunch of atheist cult subs and viewers. And I think that is clouding his judgment on this stuff.